I don't know if this has ever happened to you before, but have you ever been in a situation where you had to decide between being too black or not black enough? Because that is the position that a lot of young black men find themselves in today in America. And let me explain what I mean by that statement. If you are a black man who watched this show growing up like I did, then you know the character Bobby, played by the great Lawrence Fishburne. Well, he was an example of what we call a Negro, a term that would be considered a racial slur. But back in the day, it was a term that was used to describe blacks who were light-skinned with European features. In other words, blacks who looked more white than they did black. Today, there is a misrepresentation of black people in corporate America, which leads to some black people having to choose between being too black or not black enough. I want to tell you the story of one such individual who made the ultimate sacrifice so that his son would not have to walk the walk that he walked. When my father was born, it was during a time when Jim Crow laws were still being enforced in the American South. At that time in America, it was illegal for blacks to vote, to travel freely, to eat in certain restaurants, to stay in certain hotels, or buy certain things. The civil rights movement had not yet begun. The marches on Washington and the Montgomery bus boycotts were still years away. This was the time when blacks were lynched just for looking at a white woman the wrong way or for making a white man feel threatened. In the midst of all of this, my grandparents decided to have my brother and then my dad, both of whom were born with darker complexions. When my dad graduated from high school, the best that he could hope for was a janitorial job, which he secured at a hospital in New Orleans. He wasn't allowed to go to college because they didn't accept black students, and he wasn't allowed to join the military because they had a policy of excluding blacks from serving. So he cleaned toilets for the rest of his life. My grandfather worked as a longshoreman until his retirement. When my uncle was born, my grandparents had moved to Los Angeles in hopes of a better life for their children. They did not have access to good schools, and housing in all-white neighborhoods was still restricted to them. But my uncle was able to get a good education and go to college. He majored in social work and went on to get a job with the probation department. Both of my uncles, who are full brothers, look white. One of them is married to a white woman and the other is married to a Filipino woman. Both of them have kids who were born with lighter complexions and were raised to look white. As a result, they often identify themselves as white. My dad looks darker than what most people would consider white, but he does have some white features. For instance, his hair is straight, something that only 3–4% of black people can say about themselves. And I think that might have helped him land a job as a security guard for the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol, a job that at the time was reserved for whites only. By the time I came around, blacks were no longer excluded from eating at restaurants, hotels, and stores. But when I was growing up, we never went out to eat at a restaurant unless it was a soul food place. We couldn't afford country club memberships, and we didn't know any white folks on a personal level, not even our neighbors. To this day, I've only had one white boss, which is why I am very familiar with the term paper. I got my first job when I was 16 years old, and I remember going into that interview and filling out an application and answering questions that seemed straightforward enough. But I had a feeling that my race was the main reason why I was even there in the first place. I got hired and everything went well for the first few months. Then my boss called me into her office and told me that I needed to shape up. I was late to work too many times. I had too many unexcused absences, and I had gotten written warnings from customers. She fired me after 3 months. When I got my next job, I felt more comfortable and confident because it was at a predominantly black company. Unfortunately, that manager didn't know how to manage people. He was a micromanager, and I quickly grew tired of working for him. So I started looking for another job. When I saw an opening at a prestigious white shoe law firm downtown, I thought that it would be a great opportunity for me. But during the interview, I could tell that I was being judged for every little thing that I did, from the way that I shook hands with the interviewer to the way that I answered each of his questions. It was like I was walking on eggshells. I didn't get that job, but I was called back for a second round interview. And when I asked the receptionist why, she said, "You were the least worst candidate." And just like that, I was hired. When I entered the elevator to go to the floor where my interview was taking place, I turned to God and said, "Help me make it to 5 p.m. After completing my 90-day probation period, I was asked to complete an evaluation form by my supervisor. I scored high marks in every category except for one, communication skills. The feedback said that I needed to improve my written and verbal communication skills. This was a clear attempt to fire me. And I knew that if I didn't do something about it, I would be the next minority to leave the company. So I took my concerns to HR, but they sided with my boss. The following week, I was asked to meet with my supervisor again. He told me that he wanted to discuss my performance, but I cut him off and told him that I already knew what was coming. He tried to play it cool, but I wasn't having it. I told him that I was aware of his plan to fire me based on false pretenses and that I wouldn't let him do it. He started rambling, saying that he really wanted to help me, but I knew that I had done nothing wrong. All he had to do was read my evaluation form and he would see that I was doing a good job. The meeting ended with me handing over my 2 weeks' notice. A few weeks later, the CEO of the company called me into his office to ask why I left. I told him that I was being set up for failure. He promised to investigate, but I knew that he was just trying to save face. During the next 2 years, I held to other jobs. And while my experience at those companies was much better, it wasn't without its challenges. During my second interview at the second company, I was asked why I left my previous employer. I gave them the corporate line, but I knew that the real reason was because I was uncomfortable being the only black person in an office filled with over 50 white employees. At my third company, my boss constantly undermined my authority. Fortunately, that didn't last long because I eventually moved on to where I am today. Looking back, I realized that my experience is just the tip of the iceberg. Blacks who look white often have to choose between being too black or not black enough. Blacks who look black have to deal with different problems. It's a lose-lose situation. There are black people who look white who have to hide their blackness in order to succeed. There are also black people who look black who have to hide their education and professional accomplishments to avoid being labeled as acting white. Let's take Tiger Woods, for example. He's half Thai and half black. And growing up, his mother made sure that he connected with his black roots. He attended historically black colleges and universities, and he chose to compete for the United States in golf tournaments instead of Thailand. But whenever something goes wrong in his life, you can bet that the media will highlight his black side. Meanwhile, Colin Kaepernick, who is almost white himself, identifies as black and has spent millions of dollars connecting with his roots in Africa. But when he protests police brutality against blacks, he is villainized and ostracized by the same people who celebrate him when he plays football. Black Americans should feel outraged when they see a black CEO like Robert F. Smith pay $40 million to cover the student loans of 200 Morehouse College graduates because Smith's actions imply that black people are smart enough to acquire and maintain wealth. It also sends the message that black people need handouts. That is not a message that black people should be sending to the world. Black Americans should also feel outraged when LeBron James puts out statements like this one, which reads in part, "My tax dollars have been taken and given to countries who don't even want it or need it, instead of helping my people in my own hometown and inner cities who actually need it." The same people who don't think we should be doctors or lawyers or have nice homes or nice cars or even think that we should be president of the United States. It is precisely because of these misguided beliefs that black Americans are excluded from positions of power in this country. When black Americans are put in charge of anything, they fail upwards. They take an organization from mediocrity and turn it into a powerhouse, but that doesn't happen very often. So the next time you enter a job interview, whether virtually or in person, remember that you may have to choose between being too black or not black enough. And that's not a choice that anyone should have to make. If you enjoyed this video,